what you see here, of course, this is the traditional Sokol logo, but this booklet is a compilation of many, many sport badges and medals from Sokol, from post-independence from the Habsburg Empire. So post-1918, when World War I ended. So we're going to set this aside. This was a very important thing. The 1920s, Sokol celebrated the independence of their country and the realization, in a sense, of the vision that Miroslav Tirš had of being free and a self-governing people. So people were even more cognizant of Sokol. What do you see here? You see a woman dressed as a 1920s flapper. That was their Sokol uniform post-World War I. She's waving the Czech flag, happy, joyous, celebrating, flowers, everything, right? Sokol greetings is what the caption says. They were celebrating the independence of Czechoslovakia. You see, 1922, they're celebrating their victory and their freedom and their independence. You see it again here. The wounded legionnaire coming back from World War I being greeted by the Sokols, the great symbol of Prague in the background. And you see the American symbols because what's happening is the Czechoslovak legionnaires returned from their course of fighting in Siberia, across Russia, via the United States back to the newly freed Czechoslovakia. You see the Sokols who helped free the country and the happy, newly freed people, the women, the children, celebrating their freedom. What's this caption here? You see the joyous dancing they're doing? The caption is freedom. They've achieved their freedom. Similar to here. Over here you see the happy 1920s dressed Sokol couple. And over here you see, of course, flapper style Sokol ladies doing a gymnastics performance. This, in a sense, is the 1920s version of Libusha. She's dressed in a Sokolish uniform, Prague in the background, the Czechoslovak flag, the regions of the country. The bear symbolizes the Carpatho-Rusin region, and there's the Slovak symbols, Czech and Moravian and Silesian symbols, and flowers celebrating the newly independent Czechoslovakia. The joys of independence are celebrated here by villagers and Sokols because it came to fruition. Tirš's ideology was important. It became real. The country became independent. The monarchy was gone, the empire was gone, and they were free. And Sokol grew exponentially. They used this time, of course, society is becoming more modern. Everything's advancing materially. By 1930, the fifth largest industrial power in the world was actually the newly independent Czechoslovakia. Became, in comparison to its neighbors, very wealthy. It was a very, very democratic country. Military dictatorships ruled in Romania and Hungary and Poland. You had the chaos of Germany and the rising Nazi movement next door in Germany. By the 1930s, Sokol had morphed yet again. You see prior to World War I, it's the building of nationalism, the building of independence, the building of democracy. After World War I in the 20s, it's the celebration of their independence. The 1930s and 40s had a different theme in the Sokols in Europe. In the 30s, there was a great fear of their neighbor in Germany, Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany had revived rhythmic gymnastics and mass movement events as part of how they promoted their ideology. And there was fear amongst all the small countries in Europe that the Nazis would eventually invade their countries. So in the 30s, you began to see gigantic scale mass movement events, slets in Prague that generated 100,000 people doing mass movement on the field, thousands more in the stadium, and there was kind of this pumping up of nationalism to oppose their neighbor next door. And you see this as manifested in these postcards. This one in 1938 shows the Czechoslovak gymnast as if he's protecting the country. Of course, the Sokol is a pillar of independence, and they have the Legionnaires as well. And this is celebrating 20 years of the Czechoslovak Republic. And you see Prague in the distance, just like Libusha and her vision in the early days. Brno in Moravia, the castle in Slovakia. But again, they promote the nationalism, and they promote kind of the struggle, in a sense, against their neighbors in Nazi Germany. This is 1932, and you see kind of like rallying the troops. And the Sokol becomes a almost quasi, it's not a military force per se, but it's pumping people up, like be on your guard, get ready, sort of thing is the mindset. So the Second World War occurred. The Sokol movement existed but low-key until 1941 and the assassination of the Nazi leader Reinhard Heydrich. Heydrich had been installed as Slovakia declared itself independent in 1939. And the Nazis took over Bohemia and Moravia. And eventually, when the Second World War started, they installed Reinhard Heydrich as the governor of that region. He was assassinated by people who were parachuted in from London secretly to be a hit squad to assassinate Heydrich. He was a brutal man. He, at the Wannsee conference in Berlin, organized the whole idea of the systematic taking away of people and murdering them in the Nazi extermination camps. He was a very horrible and unpleasant, unsavory individual. So he was successfully assassinated by the people who were parachuted into Prague from London, from the government in exile, which then led to the Sokols. The Nazis were not able to find the assassins right away. In fact, a very long period of some months ensued where they couldn't find them. And it became a great embarrassment to the Nazi totalitarian state that they couldn't get any leads and they couldn't track down and find the assassins of Heydrich. The assassins were actually being hidden in various places. They would be moved around by the Czech resistance, and many Sokols were involved in hiding and concealing the assassins. Eventually they were located, they were murdered, and with that, thousands of Sokols were arrested from the Sokol leadership. The Sokol itself was outlawed until the end of the Second World War by the Nazi government. And so what happens? The war ends. Now in Slovakia, it was different. Sokol was not outlawed. And in fact, Father Tiso, Monsignor Tiso, who was the leader of Slovakia, had a relationship with the Sokols. He did not outlaw them. They continued to stay alive and do their thing, do their gymnastics, etc. But in the Czech areas, the Nazis completely banned them, and it all came from the assassination of Heydrich. 1945 comes, May 1945, the war is over, and from 1945 to 1948, Sokol reestablishes itself in Czechoslovakia. And you can see from these images, it's a celebration, it's a joyful return time, but sadly what happens is in 1948, you have the communist takeover of Czechoslovakia, and the communist government banned Sokol outright. They banned it because they understood the Sokols had opposed Nazi Germany. They did not want a movement that had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of members. At that time, they had more than 1 million members in Czechoslovakia, and they didn't want a movement that they could not control that would promote democracy and equality, brotherhood, and the Sokol values. So the Sokols were outright banned. They ceased to exist. 1989 comes and the fall of communism. Sokol is reinvigorated and returns. And what you have here in these next images are images of Sokol today in Prague. These are photos from Sokol Slet in 2012. You see the vast numbers of participants, the great march featuring Sokols from Poland and other countries, Serbia, all sorts of other countries coming. You see the big scale movement. You see the thousands of people in the stadium, both on the field and in the stands, in all these photos. Sokol is celebrated because, again, it's one of the pillars of the independent Czechoslovakia. And presently it has more than 300,000 members in the Czech Republic, and in Slovakia it has about 80 to 100,000 members. They are strictly sports societies. They do a diversity of sports. Of course, the basic sports are still rhythmic gymnastics, mass movement, but the Czech Sokols have diversified. They are promoting a lot of bicycle races, kayaking, canoeing, and the last several Olympics have seen Czech Sokol members who are doing martial arts getting, say, 4th place in Seoul in judo. The Sokols are running a martial arts program in the Czech Republic that is second to none. And they've produced the whole generation of top-class martial artists from their internal sports programs. So they are reconstituted and functioning, and they're quite a success.